An ex-convict with a score to settle moves into town. A lawyer and his family stalked. The battle between law and their worst fears. All this can only mean one thing. We're comparing Cape Fear on this episode of Retro versus Remake. Parker.
And I'm Dan Bielik. Welcome to another episode of Retro versus Remake. This is the series where we compare movies and their remakes. Join us as we answer the question, should this remake exist? Today's films are Cape Fear.
Cape Fear 1962, starring Gregory Peck, Robert Mitchum, Polly Bergen, Laurie Martin, Martin Balsam, Jack Crucian, Telly Savalas, and Barry Chase. Directed by J. Lee Thompson. Written by John D. McDonald, who wrote the novel, and James R. Webb, who wrote the screenplay, and with music by Bernard Herrmann. Cape Fear 1991, starring Robert De Niro, Old Bobby, Nick Nolte, Jessica Lange, Juliette Lewis, Joe Don Baker, Robert Mitchum, Gregory Peck, Elena Douglas, Red Dalton Thompson. It's directed by an alumni, Martin Scorsese, written by Wesley Stripp, who did the adapted screenplay for this film, and music by Elmer Bernstein, although he basically adapted and reprised the Bernard Herrmann score. Well, Dan, what's your first experience with the film?
My first experience with the film, I actually saw the remake around the time it came to like pay-per-view back in the early 90s. I remember, definitely way too young to have seen it. The first scene that I saw, like when I walked into the room, was pretty much the scene where Sam hires the guys to beat up De Niro. And I'm like, what is happening? What is this violence I'm exposed to? Yeah, and then I watched the rest of the movie, and that ending, the way De Niro's character dies, that just really terrified me, and I've always been afraid of drowning because of this movie. But luckily, there's been a lot of good parodies to kind of lighten that terror. The Simpsons did an amazing parody with Sideshow Bob. I know there's a movie called Fatal Instinct, which is like a big spoof movie, and they did a big section of Cape Fear. So this movie was equally terrifying and hilarious for me as a kid. And I had never seen the original before. Yeah.
What made me afraid of drowning was actually Retro versus Remake alumni Tomb Raider. When you play the video game, she drowns. It's like she does this weird twitchy thing, and they make a reference to it in the Venture Brothers. So I said all that because I have no experience with either of these films. This was my recommendation, but it's mostly because I had to check off the Cape Fear box. Never seen it, and it was time.
All right. Well, welcome to the group.
Welcome to this terrifying psychological thriller. We'll just jump right in with our synopsis. Max Cady is released from prison after serving many years for battery and rape. Cady promptly tracks down Sam Bowden, a lawyer residing in Georgia, whom he holds personally responsible for his conviction. Cady begins to stalk and subtly threaten Bowden's family. He kills the Bowden family dog, though Sam Bowden can't prove that Cady did it. Sam attempts to have Cady arrested, but the police have no evidence of a crime. Afraid of what Cady is capable of, but with no legal remedy to stop him, Sam hires a private detective to get dirt on Cady. Cady brutally rapes another young woman, but neither the private eye nor Bowden can persuade her to testify. In Bowden, Cady makes contact with Bowden's teenage daughter. Knowing he's at a dead end, Bowden hires 3 men to beat up Cady, like you mentioned, and coerce him to leave town. But the plan backfires when Cady gets the better of all 3. In an attempt to trick Cady, Bowden makes it seem as though he's gone out of town. He fully expects Cady to follow his wife and daughter, and he plans on killing Cady to end the battle. The 2 men engage in a final fight on the riverbank of Cape Fear, and each movie ends its respective way. How's that for a synopsis?
That's pretty good. I relived the whole movie, or both movies right there. Very nice.
Yep. Although these are effectively, for the most part, the same storyline, there are a lot of key differences throughout the film. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the biggest difference, I think, is the portrayal of our sort of main antagonist, Max Cady. In the 1962 film, Max Cady is played by Robert Mitchum.
You just put the law in my hands, and I'm going to break your heart with it.
And in the 1991 version, Robert De Niro does his version of Max Cady.
Counselor! Is that you? Counselor! Come out, wherever you are.
Let's start with the old original Max Cady. A simple Southern man, just kind of shuffles around. He's not very assuming at all. Just him in his Panama hat. What's your early read on this guy?
Yeah, so the original Max Cady by Richard Meacham. Yeah, like you said, very unassuming. Just looks like a random dude. And if he wasn't constantly stalking Sam, you would just think just an average dude. There's nothing about him that's necessarily menacing. He doesn't even look that muscular because he's always wearing very loose-fitting clothes, so you don't really get an idea of his physique until like he's in jail, and they kind of do that strip search of him. Not very threatening at all until you get to those more violent scenes with him, and especially towards the end of the movie when pretty much is gonna rape or try to rape the two women. So yeah, just a very held back performance. He's not the mustache twirling villain, and you know, for a movie that came out in the 60s, it's pretty good because you think they'd want it to be more obvious that this guy is the threat. So they almost play with your expectations, like, is he really a threat, or is this all in Sam's mind? And I like what they did there, that original one.
I think it's really effective. Honestly, for a lot of the early parts of the film, like you mentioned, you're not sure that this guy is the bad guy. Really, what lets you know is the score, which I know we're going to talk about quite a bit. But like, there's this ominous music, and I started watching it, and Priya walked into the room at one point, and like, just did like that, like the dramatic gopher. I had, like, oh shit. It's like with that music, basically anyone could be scary, right? If you take that out of it, it's like kind of like this mundane. Like you mentioned, this guy is just kind of like, hey, I moved into town. Like, did he poison my dog? Did he not poison my dog? This version of Cady does a better job of like skirting the law because he really isn't doing anything, right? At least seemingly.
Right. Yeah.
So I think he's very good at playing that role. And it's not until we see the scene with the Diane Taylor character later on,
Right,
where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a bad guy. That's very uncool. And later in the film, he starts to get a little bit creepier towards the daughter and stuff like that. And he's a late arrival to villainry versus Rob De Niro from the start of the film.
Right. Opening scene in jail, just all inked up, just working out. What has all these like fucking books on his shelf, like pictures of Stalin, all these horrible things, and just okay, that's our villain for sure, no doubt.
Yeah, it's like you've seen this guy working out, and De Niro got pretty jacked for this role.
Yeah,
like all this character traits are already being shown. Like you mentioned, the books are there, and there's like legal books and also some other more questionable material in his reading list. He's got this crazy back tat of like, it's the cross, but it's got the scales of justice on it. And the one that says truth is the Bible, the one that says justice is a knife. It's just like, all right. Like you mentioned, real Sideshow Bob energy coming from this guy. And I think that, and also let's not forget that he also has like these very extreme SS tattoos on his stomach. So if he wasn't just a kind of crazy religious zealot, he's also a Nazi. So do you know this is the villain? It's interesting to make the villain more villainous from the beginning. We know to be afraid of this guy.
Right. Well, I do like kind of that ambiguity of the first one. I think that's just a more interesting thing in general. It is fun to see what De Niro does with this character because he really does get to go all over with this character, because Robert De Niro's Max Cady was in jail for 14 years. The original Max Cady was in jail for 8 years. We don't really know much about the original Max Cady's incarceration or just what happened. We know he read a lot. He said he read a lot of books. Same thing sort of happened to this Max Cady. He was illiterate before he went to jail, but then he started reading a lot. He said he started with like simple like children's books, and then he went on to law books. So he likes to consider himself a lawyer. He also went over like some of the horrible things he had to endure. He said he got raped by white and black men, so a lot of raping going on in this movie.
Of 4 guys holding you down in jail and stuff.
Yeah,
and like you said, twice, not just the white guys.
Right. That's right. So yeah, this is a very tortured individual who's been hardened by the legal system. So you could understand why he'd be very mad getting out of jail.
Not to discount the original, I think that the original does do a good job of which you don't really get the same scene in the remake of outlining like what that Katie lost. Well, you don't hear about like the brutality of prison. He's like, you know, his wife left him, the kid, and like, yes, De Niro brings that up, but I felt like Mitchum did a really good job of like kind of explaining what happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
In the De Niro version, I think there was just so much other stuff going on that like kind of like you could blink and miss the backstory about his daughter not knowing who he is or thinking that he's dead.
Yeah, in the remake, he does mention that he had a daughter, but he doesn't even know who she is, or she doesn't know who he is. But in the original, Katie goes into a lot of detail about like, you know, I had a wife and kid, and then she married this other guy, but then I found her after I got out of jail, and then I pretty much kidnapped her, probably raped her, got her drunk and everything, and like threatened her. It's like, it's really dark, and he has this roundabout way of saying it because he doesn't explicitly say what he did.
Mm-hmm.
He just says, you know, I took her, I made her write this letter to her family, got her good and drunk, and then I made her do this, and that's how I deal with my women or problems. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like that original Max Cady's really fucking nasty, man.
Yeah, and it's like he's very good at that. Like where De Niro, yes, he does play sort of the legal margins. He knows because he's so studied of the law where the line is, and he uses it effectively. The original Katie is just so good at just being subtle about everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, mister, what you pushing me for? Just a man out here enjoying a beer. I didn't know that was a crime. Like, but when he gets into it, like, he is very effective at taking something that's like horrific and making it sound like, all right, what's he talking about? Great job by Mitchum in that respect, because if you don't have those sort of spoken moments, like, who is this guy?
Yeah, you don't see, the movie does it a great way in the original of not really showing you the violence. We talked about like the first time he attacks Diane, like, you know, you see him like about to rough her up, but then the camera like pans outside and you just kind of see some figures like through the window. You don't actually see the violence. They do shy away from it pretty well in the original, but you know, again, like your imagination just like leads you places like, like what happened to her? I need to know exactly what he did. So it's, even though they don't show a lot of it, it's still really effective in the original. In the remake, though, you get that. It's Scorsese, and it's Scorsese in the 90s, so you get plenty of that violence up front. It's still pretty brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, like, there's kind of like this this play off of like the brutality, almost like the animalism of this Max Cady in the remake. And this Katie's trying to drag our protagonist into those waters. And like, we'll talk about a little bit in the ending scene, like just how animalistic that fight gets between those two is really pronounced. I mean, he literally bites his victim in the rape scene in this remake. And it's just like, hey man, this guy is like, I don't know, there's something very special about the evil that this guy is capable of. And Scorsese does a good job of kind of blending the gore with the artistic. I think that my take on this was like, it was very stylized, the film, and there was a lot of not so subtle metaphors and stuff like that throughout the film. And both work, right? Like the idea of like the pan away works really well in the 1960s because like your imagination takes over, but seeing this Katie in action is very effective in this film, which is kind of, like I mentioned, more kind of like hyper visual. And I thought that both styles worked effectively.
Yeah, true. And Max Cady also has a little bit more of a chip on his shoulder in the remake. He's kind of fighting against this white trash label that it's sort of pinned on him.
I ain't no white trash piece of shit. I'm better than you all. I can outlearn you. I can outread you, I can outthink you, and I can out-philosophize you.
Like I said, he was illiterate, but now he can read, and he's reading law books, and he goes around quoting the Bible too. So it's like, okay, he's like, all right. I get it. And, you know, like you said before, he's got the huge cross tattoo on his back. Yeah. So he's got some of that going on. He speaks in tongues at the very end of the movie. So you throw in a little bit of that religious stuff in there combined with this chip on his shoulder. He does come across as a little bit crazy at times.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I think the chip is important for this remake character because in the original, they more or less respect him from the beginning, right? Like the Sam Bowden character knows very early on, it's like, oh no, this guy's really crafty. He knows he's too smart for that. Like you hear that so many times in the movie.
Right.
Ah, he's too smart to fall for that. He's too smart to fall for this. In the remake, they kind of like do play into, like you mentioned, that white trash element. Katie, like you mentioned, is trying to prove himself, and he's like, I'm better than you. I'm better than you all. It's like he doesn't feel that because of society, and they don't give him enough respect until it's almost like too late to start respecting him. And I think that's sort of why we get different kind of endings for these two characters. But that distinction is important in this remake, and I think it's actually a smart choice to have him feel like he's lesser than because of his quote unquote white trash past.
Anything else? It's kind of hard to just talk about Katie without talking about the other characters.
Yeah, I think it is hard to talk about Katie without that because the differences between the Sam Bowdens really kind of like start to build out both of the characters. So I think you're right. Sam Bowden, we have Gregory Peck playing Sam Bowden in the 1962 film.
I've seen the worst, the dregs, but you are the lowest.
And Nick Nolte, which I was not expecting, in the 1991 film.
We got this freaking psychopath in our faces. I mean, who knows what's true and what isn't?
If you told me it was going to be Nick Nolte, I would have been like, oh, okay.
Right? You're like, okay, I guess he could play this guy.
Yeah.
Especially like the roles he takes on today. Originally, they wanted Harrison Ford, which when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's a good choice. But cool. he turned it down. I know.
I didn't kill my wife. That would have been interesting. But Gregory Peck in the original film is he's Gregory Peck, right? Like,
yeah. Atticus Finch.
Totally an Atticus Finch type character. You know, you're tall, genteel Southern lawyer, square-jawed, family man. He's a very straightforward, kind of like 60s prototypical male protagonist. And he's also in this film pretty much, like you mentioned, Atticus Finch is a great comparison. He's a really noble guy, right? Like he's pushed into this situation going back and forth with Katie, and he makes some choices that he normally wouldn't to try to protect his family. But overall, he's coming from like a pretty righteous place, like more of a self-defense type character than anything else. And he does have to get kind of pulled back by his wife at one point, who's like, if you shoot him, you're going to go to jail.
Right.
So he's respectful enough of the law that he's like, all right, I got to play within a certain rule set. And what I thought was interesting in this 1991 film was that Nick Nolte, not so much. This guy's got a lot of he's got a lot of problems.
Yes, he does have a very shady past and probably present at the same time. It's not the I guess the noble character that we had in the original film. This is a very flawed character, and we can kind of see that pretty early on because we see him kind of with this other girl, and it doesn't look like he's just friends or he just wants it to be friends. So it's heavily implied that if he's not already having an affair, that he's trying to have an affair with this woman. And then it's sort of revealed later he didn't have an affair, but maybe he did have an affair in the past. They mentioned like Atlanta or something. And then they had to see a therapist about that. So this Sam Bowden likes the ladies that aren't his wife. I think that's fair to say. And that, you know, it affects the marriage. It affects the relationship with his daughter. And it just creates all this tension that you never had in the original film.
Yeah, that tension comes into play a lot. Like you mentioned, this idea of like of infidelity and the fact that like he's put his family through this before. The fact that he clearly hasn't really learned his lesson. You know, sure, it's just like an innocent game of squash with the law clerk, but clearly, like you mentioned, there's more to it than that. And he's willing to have like private, quiet conversations on the phone with someone. And like you mentioned, that tension is clearly in his marriage. He fights with his wife pretty frequently. And the tension, like you mentioned, extends to his daughter, who like, you know, Gregory Peck, who's like just a doting, loving dad. And this guy who's like, you know, he's like, he'll kind of shake his daughter, you know, like there's a lot of implied violence from this Sam Bowden that really kind of flavored the film. And one thing that I thought was interesting to flesh him out like that, but I did think that it kind of detracted from my concern for him. Sure, his family I still was worried about,
right?
But making him kind of a scumbag made it harder to rally behind him the way that I did for Gregory Peck.
Yeah, am I really going to root for this guy who's kind of trying to cheat on his wife and he's not really a great father? And, you know, then you got the Gregory Peck and it's like, well, if he's gone, then their lives are going to be ruined because he's such a great husband and father. I need him to survive. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. If, you know, if his wife divorced him in the remake and the daughter went with the wife and it was just Nick Nolte by himself and then he had to face Max, you know, it might be I might be okay with the end result of that because this isn't the best human being in the world. But I think there's enough goodness there that you can root for him. He's not a complete scumbag. You know, he's trying, and his wife is a strong enough character where she is able to call him out on his bullshit. So it's not like he's taking advantage of his wife or just like pulling one over her. She's savvy to his fucking ways, and she's not going to put up with his shit all the time. So I think her pushing back lets you know it's okay because like she thinks he's kind of a piece of shit, but she's going to stick it out with him, but she's not going to, you know, just take his shit all the time.
As much as he's flawed in that sense, the biggest flaw, the kind of the reason in this case that Katie's after him, and a big difference between these films, is that he intentionally botched Katie's case 14 years ago, right? Like he's sitting there, he had information about the I guess the promiscuity of the victim.
Which doesn't sound like a great defense anyway. Like, oh, it's okay that he raped and battered this woman because she likes to bang a lot of men. It's like, you're still going to jail. I don't give a fuck. Like, I don't know how things were done in the 70s, but I just don't think that's a good defense.
Yeah. And it's like, all right, potentially he could have got a lesser sentence, but like, you know, there is a sort of legal responsibility, and I guess because of the profession, a moral responsibility to defend someone to the best of your ability, even if you think they're a scumbag. But like, for your kind of average person like you and me watching this, it's like, hey, yeah, so you botched the psycho's case, whatever. But you know, he did have a moral obligation, and like that does stain his ethics, even though it may have been for like a seemingly noble cause. So I thought that duality was pretty interesting. I think introducing this idea of like you mentioned, like you're still going to go to jail, but like introducing what women have to go through on the stand when they make these accusations. I thought the movie was really strong in that portrayal. And when we see some later scenes where the victim doesn't testify, it's like, all right, because you guys are both lawyers, you know how this works. You're going to drag this woman through the mud. And in this case, Nick Nolte didn't want to drag this woman through the mud to defend a villain, and it cost him. It cost him quite a bit.
It's I like the addition of making him the lawyer who didn't present all the evidence. It's like we said, he's kind of a scumbag, but you know, that's a noble gesture. He made a choice at that point. He's like, okay, I don't care about you know, being a proper lawyer here. I need to, this woman, the way she was battered, just 16-year-old girl too, same age as his daughter in the film. So he took a noble stand. He's like, this man needs to go to jail, and so I'm going to withhold some information, some evidence. And you know, as shitty as he can be because he's trying to cheat on his wife, at least he's like, he recognizes like, well, this guy's bad, and even though I'm his lawyer, he should still go to jail. So I'm not gonna say this one thing. You know, he didn't purposely like throw the case, but he just withheld some information. I think that's a better reason for Katie to be after him as opposed to the original where he wasn't even his lawyer. He was just a witness.
Yeah, he was like
And
in Baltimore,
yeah, randomly there. And like it makes sense too, because like in the remake he goes, well, why are you coming after me? Why don't you go after the DA or the judge? He's like, well, they were just doing their jobs. You were the one who was supposed to, like, Katie knew that something wasn't right there. And that makes sense. Like in the original, it's like, why are you going against the one guy who testified against you? You could just go after the judge or even the prosecution, you know, like go after anybody. I don't know why you chose the witness. It does seem a little more random in the original. I do like that they tightened it up in the remake.
Yeah, I thought that it was a smart choice because, you know, we talked about this in the past with different protagonists, but like Gregory Peck, a little too much, like you mentioned, Atticus Finch, a little too much of a hero here. It's just like you're stumbling upon crime scenes and stopping crimes and testifying, and a little too perfect. You know, I do like that they do give Gregory Peck a little bit of edge with the scene with the gun going after Katie, but I think that's more a function of the story than like how they usually have Gregory Peck portrayed in films during this time period. So as much as like the flaws of Nick Nolte did make me care a little bit less about him and the result to him, the pure villainry of Max Cady by Rob De Niro is just like, all right, I know he might suck a little bit, but like nobody deserves this. And like the lengths that Rob De Niro's character is willing to go to and the brutality of his crimes, just like, yeah, like it's not good. And I think you're right. The wife figure in this remake really helps pull this all together.
Yeah. So I think we should get into the family at this point because that'll help flesh out both of these characters.
In the 1962 film, we've got Polly Bergen, who plays Peggy Bowden.
If you touch me, you'll go back to prison for life.
You want to make a little bet on that?
But you will. I'm not like Nancy. I'm not afraid to testify. I swear it. You've got to believe me. I'm not afraid.
And in the remake, we have a name change. We have Jessica Lange playing Lee Bowden.
This town is so very nice, and everything's just so very, very nice.
And if we're going to bring them up, we might as well talk about the daughters as well. We've got Lori Martin in 1962 playing Nancy Bowden. Who I believe is 13 at the time, if I'm remembering the movie right, which that's a whole nother thing.
13 or 14, yeah, it's pretty young.
Yeah. And then Juliette Lewis, who plays Danielle Bowden in the 1991 film.
You thought about me last night, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
We got name changes for the mother and daughter, but effectively similar characters. Polly Bergen is a classic actress in the 1960s, right? Like, stand there, look good, say like a few words, and when it's time to scream, you scream. Like that. Unfortunately, roles were very limited,
right?
In that time frame. So she has some strengths in terms of like, hey, if you walk out of here, you go try to kill that guy. Right. I'm gonna call the police. That's her strongest scene, and I appreciate that she does it. It does help kind of like ground the movie and make that family tie, and the conflict that Gregory Peck has helps make that conflict kind of like work better. But Jessica Lange's Lee Bowden is a more modern sort of woman. She has her own career. She works in like marketing, so she does sketches and stuff around the house. Because she's a more modern woman, like infidelity is something that like she has to actively battle with, as opposed to someone in like the 1960s may have to just deal with it. Like she has recourse, and I thought that Lange's portrayal was actually very strong.
Yeah, Jessica Lange, just like you said, a more modern woman. She just gets more to do. You know, Polly Bergen, just the pretty housewife who just takes care of the daughter, makes sure the house is clean, I guess. And it's not really much to her. She, like you said, she has that one good scene where he's about to go out with the gun, and then she calls the cops, and he comes back. And, she's kind of an equal sometimes. Like when he's going through the plan at the end of the movie, he really just has an alone moment with his wife. He's like I'm gonna go through with this only if you say yes. And then she's just like, yes, let's get him, Sam. So
Yeah.
I like that he at least, just let me just make sure it's okay with the wife. I like that he did that.
Yeah.
But she doesn't really have much to do, like more than like victim, like you said. Max really has a fucking really creepy scene with her at the end of the movie. Maybe we'll
no
yeah, maybe we'll save that for the ending.
Yeah, let's
but yeah, she's just the dutiful wife who looks pretty and then plays the victim when she's the victim. So there's not much to her. Jessica Lange, though, like you said, she has her own career. She pushes back against Max. She pushes back against her own husband. Just a really interesting character, lot stronger in the remake. And she makes a pretty bold decision too at the end of the movie, which I'm sure we'll get to when we get to the endings. But I like the changes they made with her, and I just like how strong her character is in the remake.
Yeah, she's definitely strong. Like when she interacts with Max, it's briefly early in the film, but like,
right,
get the hell out of here. Like,
right.
Like she's not afraid of him the way that you would kind of think she might be. And it is interesting to make her a stronger character. And it's a good thing to like kind of show a kind of more modern relationship and the struggles of like someone who's trying to make their own career, who has like a high kind of powered husband, and like that dynamic played out very well. And I think the angst from their sort of them butting heads, like the husband and wife, has clear sort of psychological effects on their daughter.
Right.
And I think it leads to probably one of our biggest, I would say the daughter is the biggest change between the two films, just how they're both portrayed. So kind of getting into that, Laurie Martin's Nancy Bowden is, for nothing else to say about it, she's a child.
Yeah.
She is a young child. It's very clear she's like a little girl. Even though she's a teenager, she still reads like young, right?
She's very small. Like she's like, I don't know, like 2 feet smaller than Gregory Peck when she's like standing next to him. She looks very tiny. She looks like a little girl.
Yeah. And she acts like a little girl, right? Like she's not aware of all the like the trials and turmoils of the world, right? Like she's just living her life innocently.
Right.
She gets a pretty strong scene where when she interacts with Max Cady in the school and has to like kind of run away, and she thinks he's in the building and it turns out somebody else, and then she runs into him, gets hit by a car. That was crazy.
Randomly, just like in just like in Superfly, randomly.
like Fat Eddie. Again, being like a small child, basically in a portrayal, you don't get a lot out of her other than being a victim. Juliette Lewis, a lot of work in the acting department from her Danielle Bowden. A lot of work.
She starts the movie.
Yeah, she does. She's reading this kind of diatribe at the beginning. It's like, our only fear about the cape is that it's may end. Like, it's a very interesting portrayal. She kind of gives me like the MTV kind of era teen vibe, like grew up watching music videos. She closes her door and like tries to shut the world out. She definitely listens to Nirvana. Can't prove that, but she definitely does. And making her a little bit older, she's at this age where she is vulnerable in the sense that like she's coming into her own as a woman, and because of her relationship with her father and stuff like that, like it's not really going well at home. She's looking for escapism. She's looking for a safety net outside the home. And it allows this sort of like villain to infiltrate her mind. And I think that like, again, that's a really strong portrayal. Like, how do terrible people like this kind of succeed at their crimes, and it's like here it is, like they pick on the vulnerable, and she plays that very well.
Yeah, not really a broken home, but there's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of instances of like Nick Nolte coming out and being like, it's okay, nothing's happening. And then, like you said, she'll run to her room, listen to some Jane's Addiction or whatever. She's listening to Guns N' Roses while watching Jane's Addiction. That's what she does in this movie. Sure, why not? It's the 90s. Yeah, so there's a lot of instances of life at home is not so great. We get a little bit of her backstory. It's actually summer, and she's going to summer school, and her parents kind of punished her because they caught her smoking some weed.
Right.
And the parents even recognize, like, hey, we just a little bit of grass. We did it back in the day, and it's like,
we smoked dope.
Yeah, they keep punishing her, and then he's like, or Max Cady, I should say, he's able to, recognize the vulnerability in her and able to make a connection with her because she's seeking it so much because she can't connect with her parents anymore, right? She's feeling completely isolated from them, and then the stuff he's saying is kind of making a little bit of sense to her. He's able to find that connection, and then you get this interesting dynamic where it's we'll get to that scene. We'll get to that, but you are getting this interesting dynamic where it's like, well, is she gonna go with Max in the end? Is she in favor of this new guy that's supposedly terrorizing the family? Because she seems really, really into it. I don't know if we want to go over the scene in the theater right now.
Maybe a little bit. Like, Max is very well read, right? Like, we know that about this character. He's very well read, and he's kind of playing off of like the fact, because look, he's been stalking them. He kind of understands their psychology, and he's like, playing into that teenage angst, playing into that that sort of age of discovery. He's like giving her books and stuff like that, giving her reading, and like they have this strange connection. Do we want to talk about the theater scene? I don't know.
I mean, we could. It's part of the character. It's a scene that's different because in the original we get the chase scene that you had mentioned, and they were originally going to do that in the remake, but then they kind of improvised and they did what we saw in the movie.
Interesting. Ugh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, what we see in the movie is that like after another bout, like when the wife finds out about the infidelity, they have a fight. Max Cady, who's pretending to be this drama teacher, who's already kind of brought up by Nolte's character. Why they got this young guy? Like he's worried that she's more into boys and perhaps even like actual men, and Katie's able to like convince her that he is like a teacher, lure her into this theater, and they have like this, like you mentioned, that's improvising. Fucking, that's some acting right there. Like just their interaction is so like wrong, but very believable. Like he sticks his thumb in her mouth. He's giving her reading. She's incredible in this scene, by the way. Like, just I believe that this is a young woman that is falling in love with a psychotic villain. And again, it's just the strength of this remake is that like we can take this character and let her play both sides of that equation. Versus the original film where it's like you're just 13 or 14, whatever. Like you're a little kid. Sometimes you hang out on the boat. You like the family dog. I don't know anything about you. You probably watch cartoons still. This girl wants to be an adult, but she also, I don't know, she needs some figure in her life, and her father's not providing that for her. And I don't think that, maybe because of how well read she is, she probably thinks of herself as more mature, and maybe boys her age aren't doing it for her either. It's not really like laid out, but it feels like that's kind of what he's playing off of. And it's a very effective scene. Creeps me out though.
Yeah, super creepy. Having her suck the thumb and then they make out a little bit. It's like, whoa, man. I didn't see any of that stuff coming. But it works with the character. You're saying this guy is in jail because he raped and battered a 16-year-old girl. Well, here he is kind of trying to do it again. Maybe he'll come across as like nice and charming in the beginning, but like, once he gets her alone, or what, you don't know how evil or vile he can get. So it works with the character, as creepy a scene as it is. And it's not as creepy as if like happened in the original, because Juliette Lewis is older, like she's
Right.
16, 17, but she's still like more mature looking, certainly, than the original Nancy, who would definitely look like that's a little girl. And having Max threaten to rape her was just like, what the fuck? Like that's that's just really creepy, because she looked like a little tiny girl, and it's like you're threatening the mom, saying you want to rape her, and it's like, ooh, to make her a little bit older, as creepy it is to still seeing her suck the thumb and everything. Definitely a good choice to just make her look a little more like a woman as opposed to a little girl. So
I forget the exact line Mitchum's character says, but he's like, it's basically like she's starting to fill out like her mother. And it's like, oh man, like, come on, bro. Like that was his thumb scene. That was his creep factor. Having her be older too, she plays a real factor in the final fight. And, there's just so much more that you can do with this character than what you could do with the younger kind of Laurie Martin's Nancy Bowden. Like Juliette Lewis, just I don't know. She's I can't say no. She's phenomenal in the movie. Like they're quite the upgrade.
Yeah. Are both these females, Jessica Lange and Juliette Lewis, they both are just very strong female performances. They have more agency. We always drop that word, and they certainly do. We see it in the ending, and I just like how Juliette Lewis's Danny is just able to, play that line. Like, is she gonna join Max, or is she gonna go with her family? Like, it's really blurred until the murders happen in the house. Like, so. Right. Like she, up to that point, she was still like taking those books in, like even like the whole thing, like her dad was supposed to be faking that he was in this trial, and then we're gonna lure him here so we can kill him. She's still like, I kind of like this guy, and I don't really think he's bad. I think my dad's full of shit, and she plays it really well. She was nominated for an Oscar. It's her only role she was ever nominated for an Oscar, Juliette Lewis.
Well, shit, I get that. Well deserved, honestly. And like you said, like her dad being flawed the way that he is, kind of a shithead. So like when it's clear De Niro's been there, he left the book sexist, plexus, nexus, and sexist. So you left the sex one. And like she's like, oh, and like hides it under her like sweater and stuff like that. It's just like, yeah, she's into this guy. Too many people are into this guy, and she's one of them. And that very fact messes with Nick Nolte's character as well. Like, he can't control her feelings, and like his attempts to try to like take a hold of the situation don't work. Like it's just like smoking pot, right? Like you yelling at her isn't solving anything. When he finds out that she has this connection with him, she again kind of starts shaking her and stuff like that. It's like, hey man, that's making it worse. Like she's just gonna withdraw more, and it's a great dynamic, and honestly, huge upgrade in the wife and daughter department in this remake, and it plays well into this adaptation of the story that they're telling.
Yeah, because I just want to add to that scene, like when he finds out, like she's maybe like he's trying to find out, like, did he touch you? He's confronting her, and when she's in her underwear too, it's a really weird scene. So he's like, did he touch you? And she's like not saying anything. She starts to smirk, and he's like, don't you laugh, and he just grabs her face and like kind of mushes it, and it's just like, dude, man, like you're showing her nothing but like violence and like just aggression, and then De Niro's showing her nothing but like compassion. It's like, of course she's gonna fucking run to this other guy and hate you. Just makes complete sense. So it's just a really interesting way to spin that character. It's almost like an additional storyline, like the battle for the daughter. Who's going to win? Is it going to be Max or Sam? So it was a really great addition to the remake.
Yeah, and even like you mentioned with like some of the ambiguity towards the end, sort of tone the line. Did he really? Like, who won that battle? Like, that's kind of an open question, Very, very great portrayal. And like I said, I didn't know that she got nominated for the Oscar either, but like, you tell me that makes perfect sense. She was fantastic in the movie. There's a lot of ways we can kind of navigate sort of this next. I think we should talk about the private detective. I do want to get into sort of like our mid-movie victims, but I think it's important to know about the private detectives in this case.
Okay, yeah.
In the 1962 film Terry Savalas plays Charlie Severs.
Telly Savalas.
And in the 1991 film, Joe Don Baker is Claude Cursett.
My pop was a cop. 20 years. This is his favorite drink.
Who is a very interesting character. So the Charlie Severs character, I don't really have much on him, but I do have a lot on sort of how we get to that point. He's not really that important, right? Like the way that I think that Joe Don Baker's character is, but the circumstances of how we get to Charlie Severs, I think, are pretty important. Okay. Like Gregory Peck, like I mentioned, really does play the kind of influential, the councilman. Everyone in town respects him, and like he's able to just use that immediately. There's a guy in town who's bothering me. Go pick him up. Like you're like, yes, sir. But they're like, we have ways to get people like this. Stop hanging around town. And when I was watching it, the time period did come into factor for me. It's like, hey, you can't mess with this nice white guy in 1962. Like I was like, why doesn't he just shoot him? Like, what are they gonna do? He matters and he doesn't. And it's just like all the steps that police take before we get to the private detective are like far more intricate than what we get for Nick Nolte's character. Like, they're picking the guy up. They're calling him a vagrant, a hobo. He got kicked out of multiple. Excuse me, Matt Cady gets kicked out of multiple houses because of Gregory Peck. And at a certain point, the cops are like, "Yeah, we can keep this up forever."
And the lawyer's like, "No, you can't."
Yeah, exactly. They introduce a lawyer character who's like a civil rights kind of lawyer, and is able to basically back the cops out. And they're like, "If you keep harassing this guy, we're taking you to court." And they're like, "Well, I guess that's it." Sam, we did the best we could with our 60s justice. You're gonna have to, but we're not done helping you. Here's another tip: check out this Charlie Severs guy. So honestly, like Severs is a pretty straightforward PI. Like, I mean, he's really there to say, "I've got some information, and maybe you should like hire some guys to like beat him up." Again, really, what matters for him is how we get to the fact that he even shows up in the film, versus this 1991 film where they really lean into this Joe Don Baker as
they do. Yeah, they do.
Jim Beam and Pepto Bismol, the drink of choice.
That was
What's your kind of early read on Baker's Cursed?
I mean, he's a PI, and he'll kind of do whatever it takes to get your money. Like, you want some guys to beat him up? You want to hire me? We can stage this kind of thing, and if he's on your property, I could shoot him and kill him for you. So he's on that tightrope. Like, is this legal? Is this illegal? But like, I think we could spin it in a way where it is legal, and just make sure if you hire these guys that we don't know it's you and all this stuff. So he's a character, man. I don't know. I love the teddy bear. The teddy bear thing, that is so great.
Teddy bear moves half an inch.
That captured my imagination so much when I was a kid. Like, oh my God, they tied the fishing line to a teddy bear, and he's just gonna sit there and watch it. That's intense, man. Like, just the idea of just sitting and watching a teddy bear all night is just like blew my fucking mind as a kid. So he's a character, man. And,
he's sitting there, he's kind of like just got the gun and just
right.
And you're right, like his level of like commitment to this job is like honestly what it is he's former cop, basically more or less gone rogue, but like he's still within the bounds of the legal system himself, and he's just like, I could hire some guys to beat him up. I could like he's the type of guy that plant evidence. He'll sell you a gun. He'll teach you how to use a gun. Yeah. He's like, honestly, you're probably not even built for this. I'll shoot him. And just like the idea of this guy who's just like slugging back Jim Beam and Pepto Bismol because his dad liked to drink that too. It's like, what's that story? And the guy's just taking a couple of belts of that and he's just sitting there, like you mentioned, all night with this teddy bear. I'm like, this guy is nuts.
Yeah.
And what's great about him, because they build up this private detective so much, that when ultimately he has things happen to him, it's like, well, shit, if that guy isn't going to make it, McNulty has no shot. So he's this great sort of ancillary character that becomes fairly important and really is a stakes maker type character, right? Like, you come to this guy, now we're at the point where we're hiring guys. Now we're at the point where we're shooting guys. Now we're at the point where, you know, we're in fist fights. He just really does a good job of taking this from a pretty kind of like straightforward stalking situation to like, all right, we're going into vigilante justice, and I think it plays really well. Severs occupies a similar kind of space, but just not even remotely close. Like,
yeah, he's definitely not as memorable as Joe Don Baker. I mean, he's important for sure because he does lure Katie out at the end of the movie, and you know, it sets events in motion. But just when it comes to like a memorable character who's just like off the fucking walls, that's Joe Don Baker. That's such a good portrayal.
Yeah. Honestly, you can tell with this one that like Scorsese just let a lot of people just go, right?
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned that improv line, and like there is no way that De Niro was on script for like like at least a good 30% of this movie. Like, just the portrayals are so over the top. De Niro with the slick back hair and the crazy Georgia accent, Joe Don Baker, you know, chasing the wire up the to the door. It's just such a great portrayal. And I don't want to get into the ending just yet, but like he's critical
yes
for it. And you know, again, like I said, a stakes maker type character, and both of these detectives help kind of introduce another high stakes scene in the films, like I mentioned, with our victimized women. I'm going to bring up
sure
Barry Chase, who plays Diane Taylor. And Elena Douglas, who plays Lori Davis.
By the guys that I see cross-examining the people on the stand, just crucify them and just laugh about it later.
Who's the law clerk and sort of Nick Nolte's pseudo maybe lover in the film. Diane Taylor is more of like this sort of kind of like barfly character. She's a single woman in a small town, attractive, clearly like she's not like tied to any one really, like any man or anything like that. So it's like kind of puts her on the fringes, right? Like if you're not like a housewife, then you're sort of you know, there's only a few spaces for women to operate in this time frame and be reputable. So she's certainly not a bad person, but she's sort of adrift, and that makes it easy for her to be a victim for Max Cady. Versus Alana Douglas, who is a professional, younger, but like she is in this sort of flirtation with her employer, Nick Nolte. And what elevates her status as a victim in this film is that she has this connection. Like clearly, like Katie is targeting her because he knows it's going to hit Sam Bowden where it hurts. And just the kind of depravity to like victimize a woman just to kind of make somebody else feel bad is like next level.
Yeah, that connection that she has with Sam, you know, it was a smart choice. It's like that's the reason she's gonna get attacked, because Katie wants to hurt Sam, so he's gonna go after this, you know, like you said, like this potential love interest or that he wants to have. And because she works within the legal system, he knows that she won't even testify or do anything against him, because just what it means to be seen by her coworkers like that. Like she doesn't want to be put in that situation. She knows Sam wouldn't put her in that situation. And then also there's like that worry about like, you know, your wife doesn't even know about me, and then if I had to testify, they would know about you, Sam. So there's a lot of reasons for her to not testify against Max, and you think it's like, well, why wouldn't you testify against that? It kind of makes sense. It's not well, that's stupid. That's a stupid reason for her not to testify. I think, you know, in the context of everything that was happening with her character and her relationship with Sam, I think they did a pretty good job of, you know, putting that fear into like, oh, I just can't testify. What will happen, what this means for you and me and for everybody we work with. And, you know, having her have that connection with Sam obviously is a good reason for her to be attacked, as opposed to Diane, who doesn't have any affiliation with Sam at all and is kind of just a random victim of Max at the end of the day. And I got to say, though, I do like how he picked her up at the bar, because he's at the bar. The cops are taking him to question him. And then he's like, hold on a second. He's like, I'll be back in an hour. Lose these guys if you want to be with me. It's pretty smooth line.
Smooth guy.
So, and then we eventually see him with her later, and we're like, oh, wow, look at this. What's happening here? And then all of a sudden, he just kind of just sides while she's sleeping. He just has this menacing look about him, and he's like, I'm going to beat you. It's like, what the fuck? It's like totally unprovoked.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it. And it kind of comes out of nowhere, but it plays into just how villainous his character can be. Like, this is who he is. This is what he does to women. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't need you to have a connection to the guy I'm having revenge with. I'm just going to do this because this is what I do, and I need to do this. And it just really, like, anybody could be a victim of Max Cady in that original film. But in the remake, it's really just focused on people around Sam. So while I like the connection in the remake, it's still pretty intense because it is kind of a random woman in the original film.
It's effective in the original because it's like a pattern thing, you know, like this is this guy's deal, right? Like, sure, he could certainly have just like a consensual relationship with this woman. Like, that's not really what it's about for him. He has this this monster in him, right? Like, this is what he does, you know? And it's the point of the movie where we realize, especially in this original film, we're like, oh, this guy's serious. Like, you know, we're not just kind of like shuffling to the police station to have small talks anymore. We're not, did I not with the dog? Like, oh, we're at the point where like, I see what Sam Bowden's been saying this whole time. And he picked his victim knowing that, like, what's she gonna do? Like, there's no recourse for a woman in that time frame who isn't involved in something like that. What I like about this sort of original is that we see that because she doesn't have that sort of recourse, and she just skips town, which happens to the other character too. But like, it really does help frame the conversation that Sam has with his wife, because like, look, he goes after our daughter. You know what happens in these situations. They're going to have to go on the stand. They're going to have to go over details. They're going to have to do all this stuff. And the movie does a really good job of just saying that, like, we can't let this Max Cady character win because there's not, again, this idea of like the law isn't really on our side, even though I'm a lawyer. Like, I know how the law works. And you get that from two separate conversations in this original movie, which is like, hey, why won't you testify? And she's like, you know why I can't testify. And then putting it into a personal standpoint of his own daughter, it's like, could you imagine putting a 14-year-old on a stand to recount something like that? And what makes the remake version of it work is you get all that in one conversation because she's like, I'm a law clerk. I know what we do to women that have these problems. Is basically what they wanted Sam Bowden to do to the victim 14 years ago. She's like, I'm not doing it. I'm skipping town. And I don't know, like both are so effective. As weird as it sounds, I slightly prefer the original because like the ambiguity. The remake, yes, there's that connection, but like, this is gonna sound weird. It starts getting into this like horror film like level for me, right? Like the original gets like very psychological in its thriller. This remake, the same thing, but like Max Cady's starting to kind of get into like, you know, like Freddy and Jason mode from the scene because just like biting somebody's face, like face off. That's pretty intense.
Yeah, I think the original, what they do is, they show that like just what monster Max Cady is. Like, it doesn't matter who his victim is. He's gonna keep doing this. Like in the remake, he goes after Laurie because of the connection with Sam. So it's a very revenge driven, his attacks. But the Max in the original, he doesn't need revenge. This is, like you said, he's just a monster. Yeah. And it really just demonstrates it really well by finding just a random victim in the middle of all of this. And he knew, like you said, he knew she couldn't do anything about it. So he just makes him so much more worse because he's just going to keep doing this. And even after he gets his revenge against Sam, he will not stop. And it just makes him seem a lot more threatening as opposed to the Max Cady who's like, well, I need to find all the people who have a connection with this guy because this is a revenge plot for me.
Yeah. It's like, as monstrous as he is, the scope is it seems to be more kind of like focused.
Yeah.
I'm not, like you mentioned, I'm not really thinking about his kind of future or really his past endeavors. I'm really concerned about this specific family. Whereas like this Max Cady, like like you mentioned, whatever happens, like he's gonna keep doing this. And I think that does actually flavor kind of how the movies choose to kind of end things. I don't have a lot of other like really notable characters. I did want to kind of point out that Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum make appearances in this.
And Martin Balsam.
Oh yeah, and Balsam.
Yeah, all three of them from the original film. Balsam he was Dutton in the original, and then he was the judge in the remake.
Yeah, he plays that judge role really well. Mitchum coming back as like the lieutenant who's like, I can't help you, Sam. Yeah. And the star of the show, Gregory Peck, just outlandish Southern lawyer.
Yeah, nice white suit.
Lee Heller. Your Honor, this is a grave injustice that is befalling my client. I love how like campy he went in that scene. I think it was completely unnecessary just to basically have a restraining order go kind of the opposite way. But
right.
I love the cameo.
Yeah, it's great. And in the original film, Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum didn't get along at all. So that's why they didn't have any scenes together in the remake.
Really?
They did not like each other.
That's interesting. Good to know. But they work so well together.
I mean, when one's a hero and one's a villain, yeah. Having two people not like each other works pretty well.
That's very fair. And really the only other character that I wanted to mention, honorable mention, Zuli Montero's Graciela. Got a raw deal. You're in the movie for like 5 minutes.
Yeah. Teaches a little bit of Spanish to Danny, but doesn't really get much to do.
Yeah. That. It's kind of like a fridging kind of thing from comic books. It's like, oh, we introduced character just to have him brutalized. Oh, well. So that's ultimately our main characters. We really hit this theme of the sort of quiet, subtle Cady in the original who is willing to do violence to pretty much anybody, but has it out for Sam Bowden for kind of dubious reasons, versus like this remake, which is a hyper-focused, hyper-violent Max Cady and a flawed Sam Bowden. And because of that, and because of the age and careers of his wife, the career of his wife and the age of his daughter, we get a totally different kind of setup for a final gambit. Is it time to start talking about the endings?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to say about the characters, and the endings are very different. So.
Very different. Let's start with the original because I think that'll be easier to manage. So we have this sort of victim that we mentioned, Diane Taylor, in the original, and after that happens, Sam Bowden is like, he's kind of over it, right? Like, he hires the 3 guys to try to take Cady out, and Cady overpowers him, and a pretty, for the time, decent fight for the 60s. It wasn't like Superfly cheesy.
Yeah, it wasn't Frank Sinatra and Manchurian Candidate cheesy.
Oh my god. The karate chops. And we had that, and then after his daughter gets hit by the car, he starts to take the gun, and he's like, I'm gonna go after this guy. And he wisely chooses to sort of play his cards different. What I thought was interesting about this original is that, like, again, how like hand in glove he was with the police. They're like, this isn't working, guys. And they're like, I got it. They can't explicitly help him with his plan, but they're certainly willing to like call other departments to be like, hey, help out our buddy Sam Bowden because he's got a vagrant problem and he wants to murder him. So Sam gets this brilliant idea of like, look, this Katie guy's too good. He's never going to let down his guard in town. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pretend like I'm flying to Atlanta, and then I'm going to get on a boat.
Yeah, it gets a little muddy for me too. Because he had to go to Atlanta. Let's just backtrack a little bit. He had to go to Atlanta because he was going to get disbarred, right? Because the assault on Katie was pinned on him. And then when he...
Remake, right?
I know he was going to get disbarred anyway in the original. I don't know if it was exactly from the beating, but I know he goes into court one day and he has to hand off this case to his partner. And another lawyer goes up to him and is like, I'm going to have you disbarred. So I know there is some type of disbarring trying to happen. I don't remember if it's exactly under the same circumstances as in the remake, but he does have to go fly away if he wants to keep his job and be a lawyer still. So I think it's the same pretty much reasons in both movies.
Yeah. And you get the similar outcome, right? Which is like, I have to get on the plane. I have to do all this. So Sam Bowden gets on this plane, but like his plan in this situation is, once I get there, I'm going to basically take a boat up river to Cape Fear, and he's using his family as bait so that, Katie will go after him. And, it's the exact same setup. Katie makes sure that he gets on the plane. He's like, I got a file, and has to go to the fancy lawyer. When's he coming back? And he's like, he's not coming back until Thursday. It is muddy, and I'm going to try to get us there cleanly.
It's really muddy for me because, like, before he goes on the plane, he already brought his family to that boathouse in Cape Fear. And it's like, now I got to go on the plane by myself and then, take the boat there. It's like, but Katie doesn't know that the family's there. So, like, he wasn't following them when they originally went to the boathouse, right. I guess. I don't know. It's not clean because, like, apparently Katie's following them the whole time. But this one time when he took them to the boathouse, he wasn't following them the whole time. So that's just where it's a little muddy for me.
Yeah, that part is muddy. And, like, this idea of, like, I'm on the plane, I land, I'm going to take the boat back.
Yeah.
I'm going to work with the deputies from another town. That part is super strange and muddy, and I think that the remake probably cleans that up a little bit. But basically, he gets there, he stakes out Katie, and they're like all in like the marshes. They're just kind of like basically waiting in these river waters to see what happens. And wouldn't you know it, just like in all these movies where someone screws up a stakeout, we've had it in some of our westerns, I think, like a True Grit type film. We've had it in Insomnia.
Definitely Insomnia.
Guy drops a mug. And we got it right here. This dummy slaps himself on the face because of fly there. And then he gets the old MMA fucking choke out and drown. And the plan's not going well for Sam Bowden. Like, his whole idea is like, I'm going to sneak this guy out. When he gets into the act, I'm going to kill him. Well, because the stakeout doesn't go so well, the guy gets killed. Katie gets on the boat, goes after Sam's wife, and Sam has to like go and try to like basically save his wife from like being brutalized. Like I said, Katie goes after her, says what he's planning to do more or less. And when Sam Bowden shows up to kind of save the day, she's like, "No, he's going after her. It was a distraction." And now it's so muddy, bro.
Yeah.
I'm really trying to work through this, but like, and then Sam Bowden has to now try to save his teenage daughter because the wife, excuse my coarse language, the wife rape was just a distraction. This guy really wants to go after your teenage daughter, so now he's got to scramble back. I don't know. He does get to her in time. She's able to run away, and then they have this like kind of drawn out fight in the woods with the with the piece of the dock with a nail hanging out or whatever the hell. It was really confusing. They fist fought. Gregory Peck pretended like he was choked to death, but he wasn't really choked to death.
Mm-hmm.
Came back, hit Katie with a rock, and overcame him and let him live. It was like, I'm not going to kill you because Jesus Christ, there was a gun.
There was a gun.
There was a gun. Sorry, everyone. This is confusing. There was a gun, so he did get the gun back. He's got the gun on Max Cady, who's like, I'm not going to kill you like you want me to. I'm going to let you live, and you're going to live the rest of your days in a cell. So, he's not really just going for revenge. He wants to do this because he's Atticus Finch. He wants to do this legally. He wants to make sure that, he's not going outside the bounds of the law. He wants Max Cady to face justice in the courts. And I think that it's effective in him doing so. And at the end, his family all gets on the bug like, Jesus, that was rough. And the movie kind of ends. Apologies for how muddy that got, because that was a confusing kind of. There was way too many steps.
Yeah, there's a lot of different steps there, and it keeps going back and forth between the mother, the daughter, the father. It is very confusing. You pretty much got it though.
I appreciate you saying that, because I feel like I was all over the place.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to touch on a few things, just a few details during that. Like, again, just talking about the how brutal Max Cady could be when he's alone on the boat with the mother. It's really fucked up. Yeah. He's talking about, because we had mentioned before, like if the daughter gets raped, like we can't put her through that. We can't make her testify. And the mom's like, well, if you rape me, I am going to testify. You can't silence me like you can silence other women. He's like, well, it's not going to be rape because I'm going to have consent. And he's going on this long speech about how, like, if you don't give me consent, like I'm going to pretty much rape your daughter.
Right.
It's like really fucked up.
Maybe next week, maybe next month.
Yeah.
Jesus, dude.
Yeah, seriously. And like, again, this daughter is like a little girl. She looks like fucking, like she's maybe 13, but she looks like she's like could be 8.
Looks like she's 9 years old, man.
Yeah, she looks super young, and it's just like so creepy, like how rapey he gets over her, which is, that's a villain. That's definitely a villain.
That's a villain.
You can't say anything else other than that. And then like Max Cady just has this knack for like leaving immediately as soon as like somebody else is there to like stop him from doing a crime. Like, I'm gonna get you, Cady. It's like, well, he's not even here. Like that happened with happened with Diane. Like there were 2 cops outside when they heard Diane getting attacked, and then they come in and he's already gone. It's happening now with the wife. She was getting attacked, thrown around. Nothing apparently happened, and everybody's there just a second too late every time Max Cady attacks. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that scene with the wife, because that was just like evil, man. The way he's describing, like, I'm gonna get it one way or the other, and it doesn't really matter. And that was fucking intense.
Yeah, that's the strength of this portrayal of Cady. He's just so casual about it.
Yeah,
he's just so casual about it. It's like, yeah, well, you do it your way, but it doesn't matter. Like, this is going to happen. It's just like, wow, like the only way for this to end is for him to be stopped somehow. Mm-hmm. And what both films do well, and I guess what the original novel do so well, is like, it's personal. Like, it's this guy's family, it's this guy's daughter, and like this villain is so calculating that like he'll make you go on the houseboat to try to like save your wife just so he can slide back into the cabin to go after your daughter. And it's just like, whoa, man, that's a lot.
Yeah, he doesn't kill him at the end. He does say, like, I don't want you to take the easy way out. I'd rather you just rot in a cell. Which I thought, that fit the character. It made sense. He'd been this, like we've said, this noble Atticus Finch like character. So for him to not pull that trigger at the very end and just decide to let the law take control and deal with you there, that made sense. So I was fine with that part of it, but like it just the going back and forth and like exactly what happened, it does it drags on a little bit, and it can be a little bit confusing in that original film.
It's dark, man. It's a dark portrayal. And what does work here is that because yes, Cady's like pretty strong and he was able to fight all 3 guys, like it's plausible that Sam Bowden could win this fight. It's plausible that he could win this fight in this film, and through a little bit of luck, he was able to kind of gut it out and get the win over this guy. And I think that I like this idea of Sam sort of continuing this Atticus Finch Superman portrayal of just like the time for shooting is over. Like you're going to jail and you're going to sit there for a while. And a major difference between the original and the remake is that like it's clean enough that you're going to believe that that the law is on his side. The remake does not leave a lot of opening for this to like end well. It's a much more muddy, rough scenario that they found themselves in, and I found that to be interesting. Going into the remake,
I could start it.
Yeah,
if you want.
No, thanks.
Okay, so I think we should start when they're using the family as bait. Pretty much the same point. So, like we said, Sam has to go to testify, or else he's going to get disbarred. So, a good old private detective, Claude Kursick comes up with the idea. He's like, so you have to be in this trial? He's like, yeah, if I want to keep my job. He's like, but Katie doesn't have to be there. No, he's not going to be there. I was like, well, I got an idea. So then the whole family takes a nice trip to the airport. Katie sees Sam got on an airplane. Airplane takes off. Like you said, he gets the information. He'll be back in a couple days. And then we get back to the house and we see that Sam didn't get on the plane. So that was cleaner than the original for sure, that he just faked getting on the plane. And he was just going to hide in the house. Him and Kursick are now just in the house, just hiding, making sure they don't go in front of any windows. Oh, by the way, I love how many times Nick Nolte's character has to go up to the windows and rapidly close them.
Yes.
Yes. And so many times did we see that shot in this.
Quite a bit.
Anyway, so they're in the house. The mother and daughter are just pretending like he's not there, just trying to lure Katie. This is when the detective sets up the teddy bear and the fishing line at night, which is great. And then also at this point, Graciela is coming to the house just to do her job. And then she's told she has to stay over because that's what would happen when Sam's away. So they're pretty much doing everything to try to just lure Katie there. And then one night when Kursick is watching the bear, all of a sudden, a little twitch happens. So we got to see where that fishing line leads to. And what did you know? It's just the wind. And he just locks it, has a laugh to himself, decides to go in the kitchen, has his drink of choice. What was the bourbon and the Pepto?
Jim Beam and Pepto-Bismol.
Jim Beam and Pepto-Bismol. So he's in there drinking his Jim Beam and Pepto-Bismol, talking to Graciela, who's preparing food seemingly. But no, it's not Graciela. It's Katie. He's wearing her clothes, and he's got that piano wire. He's got that piano wire that was lost before. And here's a little bit of trivia. The piano wire is a note. It was A, 2 octaves higher than middle C. Just for all the music dorks out there. Anyway, so he gets strangled with piano wire. But he doesn't die from that because he tries to shoot Katie, I think, and accidentally shoots himself.
Yeah.
That's what happened. Yeah,
that's what I saw. Yeah.
So he tries, but he can't, and he shoots himself. The gunshot wakes up the family. And instead of killing anybody in the family, Katie just runs off, and then you got 2 dead bodies now. And in part, it kind of looked a little hilarious to me when Nick Nolte runs over to Kursick's body and he just starts slipping in the blood.
That part was ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't work for me. It looked more comical than scary or anything. And then he goes outside. He's got the gun. He just starts firing randomly. Yeah. It's like, where are you, Katie?
It was one of those things where, like, when I saw it, I was like, all right, well, don't touch the gun. Don't touch the piano wire. Definitely don't slip in the blood. And don't, like, splash around the blood a little bit. Don't fire additional shots. Like, what are you doing? You're a lawyer.
This guy's a lawyer. You should know better.
You got to know way better. And it's like, you've got a plausible reason why this guy is after you. Like, you've got a back and forth. Your prints aren't on anything in the house. So it's like, just call the cops. This is kind of the outcome you wanted, right? Like, Katie did it. And, okay, maybe you're going to struggle to prove it because of some of the other actions you took. But, like, I don't know, like slipping in the blood, shooting your gun, and then going on the run is like probably not the right answer.
There's definitely a different way the movie could have went after the murders, like you said. There might not be like some obvious evidence, but I'm sure like maybe he dropped like some hair. He's got a lot of hair, you know.
Yeah.
One of his hairs could have fallen out. Do a little evidence sweep of the house. He could have found some evidence that Max Cady was in the house. That's enough, I
He was
feel.
wearing Gracio's clothes and then put them back on her. Like
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, he did put them back on her. That's weird,
Yeah,
unless there was
right?
just a spare pair.
When do you have time to do that?
So anyways, yeah, so there are 2 dead bodies in your house, and it makes sense at this point, like, oh, let's just call the police and then they'll take care of us and they'll take care of Katie. Nope. What they decide to do is let's get the fuck out of the house. Let's go to our houseboat at Cape Fear and we'll call the police as we're fleeing the scene of a crime, which they acknowledge in the movie that they look like #1 suspect because they are fleeing the scene of a crime. If 2 people are murdered in your house and you didn't do it, do not flee the scene of the crime.
Yeah, especially if you now have Nick Nolte's foot, hand, and back prints in the blood. His bloody hands on a murder weapon and additional shots randomly thrown. It's a bad look. It's bad lawyering.
It wasn't very smart, but at least it brings us to Cape Fear for our climactic ending.
We did get there.
So we're finally at Cape Fear. Well, we're getting to the boat, but they're not alone because Max Cady's under that car, just holding on for his dear life.
So crazy.
De Niro said he wouldn't do that unless he could see a stuntman really do that, and apparently you can latch yourself onto at least a car that's high enough off the ground, like their car was.
That car was pretty rage, yeah.
Yeah. So they get to Cape Fear, they get to the boat. Mona, I believe, is the name of the boat. And, of course, De Niro's there as well. And, you know, ultimately he shows himself. I think he knocks out Sam first. He's able to tie him up.
Ties him up.
Yeah, then he shows himself to the mother and daughter, goes after them. He puts Danny in like a holding thing. And then he gets very rapey with the mom. And he just stops for some reason, I guess, because he wanted to do other stuff. So he pulls Sam in there, and then he gets Danny out, and he's just like, I'm going to do all these horrible things. And this is when Jessica Lange's character, like, you know, she tries to take control of the situation.
I know about loss, Max. I know about losing time, even losing years.
She's like, look, Max, you've suffered. I've suffered too. Not quite like you. I wasn't in prison, but I've been suffering for years. You've been suffering for years. Just take me, you know, in an effort to save her daughter and her husband, I guess just her family in general. She's kind of offering herself up kind of as like a sacrificial lamb at this point. And it kind of works because he's like, that's some good words you said there. Because he's all about it. He's like, maybe I don't need the daughter. Maybe you are just what I need. And, at some point he decides to light a cigar because amidst all this. And then that's when Danny, she had this lighter fluid. She just whisked the lighter fluid on him. And then, man, he lights up like a Roman candle.
Yes, he does.
I'm gonna enjoy this all the more.
That shit just all over him. And he's like fucking screaming, which is funny too, because earlier he demonstrated his tolerance for pain and heat because Danny had thrown boiling water in his face and he lit a flare and just let it melt onto his hand. He's like, prison makes you hard. I can handle anything. You can't handle lighter fluid and fire on your face. So that shit shut him up immediately. He jumps out of the boat. I must say there's also a squall going on. So the boat is going down the river on its own, going to some rough terrain coming up. So we need to control the boat. It's at this point, I think they untie Sam. They try to get control of the situation. But then Max Cady gets back on the boat, and they just starts fighting. Everybody starts fighting.
He comes back and like Max Cady gets the upper hand of the situation again, and now he's got this crazy burn marks on his face and stuff like that. And you know, being a pal, like Nick Nolte's like, hey man, someone should be like, you know, we're going into like rough water. Someone should be guiding the boat. And Danny's like, oh, I could do it. And he's like, nah, no one's, you gotta stay here because I'm not done being rapey. And I'm gonna make you watch. And I'm just like, wow, this is intense. And his sick evil plan would probably work if you would let someone someone pilot the boat, because they just like hit a squall. The boat starts rocking all over the place, and like everyone's getting thrown around. Danny and Lee just make a jump for it. They're like, fuck this. I don't even care what part of the river we're in. We're jumping in. And we get the Nick Nolte, Rob De Niro super fight. It's what we've all been waiting for, I think. It was such a strange fight, from a parody standpoint, because, like, obviously, Nick Nolte doesn't beat Rob De Niro's character in a fair fight. Not that a fight with Max Cady would ever be fair. But, like, they have this whole back and forth, and, like, once they're out in the river, right? When does Max Cady get his ankles shackled to the
it's during that fight. It's right before the boat hits the rocks.
Mm-hmm. So it's like they're fighting in the boat, but like because the boat is in these rough waters, Max Cady gets thrown about a little bit, the gun gets dislodged, and Nick Nolte's able to kind of get the upper hand and actually strap this guy to the actual boat. So like the handcuffs that he was going to use on Nick Nolte are now being used on Max Cady. Boat hits rocks. The rocks takes them ashore. Nick Nolte, rightfully so, was pretty pissed. And they get into like a rock fight at that point, which I wasn't expecting two guys to like take large stones and hit each other and like throw them at each other. But even in that scenario, Nick Nolte was kind of getting his ass kicked in that fight too.
Even though Robert De Niro is like handcuffed to this boat, he can barely like fucking stand because of the water's just crashing on him. He's still able to pick up a rock, hit him with it, and still throw it pretty accurately and nail fucking Nick Nolte in the face with a huge rock.
Yeah, and this is where some of that like imagery I was talking about starts to get a little like knock you over the head a little bit. Like there's blood on Nick Nolte's hands, and he washes his hands of the blood and the sin. Rob De Niro gets, like you mentioned, he starts speaking in tongues as the piece of the boat that he's stuck on is like now stuck in the water.
Before that, Nick Nolte's like, he's gonna kill him. He takes this huge rock. Yeah. And he's like, I'm not gonna Gregory Peck this thing. I'm gonna fucking kill you, man. So he takes the rock. He's about to smash his head in, and as soon as he does, a huge wave just takes De Niro and the piece of the boat that he's attached to the rest of the river. So he doesn't get his vengeance that he wanted.
Right. Yeah. And Rob De Niro in this fantastic, like you said, much parody scene. He's stuck on this pole, handcuffed, speaking in tongues, recounting Bible verses and stuff like that. And just like no fear at all, sitting there waiting for his demise. He's still got the crazy De Niro eyes, like his water's up to here. He's like,
yeah.
And I'm just like, yo, this guy's nuts. That part's a little goofy. Max Cady drowns to death in the middle of Cape Fear. The daughter picks back up on her narration from the beginning of the film, and it's more or less like, yeah, that was fucked up and we don't talk about
it. We don't talk about the summer of 91 anymore.
I don't know. That's such a different ending. Again, without the obvious like biblical metaphors knocking you over the head like those rocks. I guess this is a happy ending, but not really. Like this family is forever scarred and broken. And that makes sense. I mean, look what happened to them. You're not going to be able to Gregory Peck your way into like just going back to like, I'm just going to go back to work next week and my family's going to be fine. Like this is like lasting scarring damage. And like, I'm surprised that they're even all still like together, like this.
Right. Yeah. That there wasn't like a PS scene, like there was a divorce or anything. That's what I thought would happen.
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, like it is kind of jarring because like if you're following that scene, she's kind of saying that like there's like, what did I do last summer? Like she's like reading in what looked like a classroom setting. Maybe it had something to do with like her drama school or something like that. But it was just like, wow, dark film, and then we kind of get like the insomnia negative, then it turns
Yeah.
red, and we zoom in on her eyes, and it's like, I don't know, they play a lot with a lot of the visuals, and I thought that that was one of the strengths of the remake as well. But dark ending.
Dark ending. I mean, it makes sense. It's a traumatic event. It's not gonna just life go back to normal. You know, obviously they've been through a horribly traumatic experience. Also, they had a bunch of drama going on at the same time. You know, with the parents arguing, the infidelity of Sam, and just like isolating their daughter, just like, you know, losing that connection they have with her. So there's a lot of things going on in addition to the traumatic event of Max Cady that they have to deal with afterwards, and it's not going to be easy sailing for the Bowden family afterwards. You know, it's going to take a lot of work if they want to stay together as a family unit. So it is sweet because obviously the bad guy's gone, but it's bitter because you still have problems and you're going to have to deal with them. They're not going away.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, I struggle to find a scenario where that family doesn't tear apart, you know?
Right.
Like, and I guess maybe what helps is that the daughter being of an older age, like, is going to be able to get to the point where, like, she's independent of them. But, like, I don't know, there's not really a lot of solace in that. It's just like, these events happen, these are the effects, and that's it, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of gave me a little bit of, like, without all the extracurriculars and the credits, it kind of gave me, like, Halloween remake vibes. Like I said, like the insomnia thing, but also like Halloween, just like that happened, negative like camera filter, and go back to that score. Just like that. That's it. Weird, man. Creepy film. That's more or less like how the two movies went down. I think that, like, I'm usually not the music guy and stuff, but like I gotta give a shout out to the music choices. Like I said, that original score, Herman's original score, like I said, if you take that score out of that original movie, it's just a movie about a guy that's kind of walking around town and his two neighbors slightly having a disagreement until violence happens, right? Without that score, the original, is like, the tension wouldn't be there. So it's a very effective musical score. I thought it was pretty bold in the remake for Elmer Bernstein to basically just adapt the same score. They punched it up quite a bit, but like that score hits different in that 1991 movie, but it was interesting that it was even applicable to both films. I found that to be pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe because I grew up with Cape Fear, it's such a recognizable score to me. So I was happy to hear it in the remake. I mean, I guess I was happy to hear it in the original because I thought that song just came from the remake, and then watching the original, I was like, oh wow, it's actually from here. I mean, doesn't have that intensity that I recognize it from the remake, but it's still there. And I don't know, I liked it. I liked it in both films, and yeah, it is a little bit like on the nose of like evil in this town, but like, I don't know, it's just such a recognizable score to me. So I really like it in both films.
Like anything could have been scary with that score, right? Like someone just kind of turned around and looking at me. I was like, oh wait, you know, it was pretty funny. So very effective score. I'm glad that it made its way to the remake, and like you mentioned, growing up with it, that the remake punched it up so much that like it worked even more. It really smart choice, and honestly a bold choice, because it's hard to take someone's original score and mess with it, and they did it effectively, and that impressed. Let's just put it that way.
Fair enough. Is there anything else, Reggie? Any other scenes that you thought were just different in the remake that we didn't address? Any character traits that we didn't discuss?
No, I think we were pretty thorough. I mean, honestly, the main scene that jumped out at me, we talked about, is Gregory Peck's Lee Heller is hilarious. It feels like it doesn't really fit in the movie. It feels almost like an aside, like an Easter egg, but I'm glad it's there because it's such a preposterous character. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's always fun to see people from the original in the remakes, so that was much appreciated.
Totally.
All right, should we just get to our verdicts then?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Dan, what is your verdict for the Cape Fear remake?
Like I said, I grew up watching the remake. I'd never seen the original, and I liked a lot of things from the original, and you know, it sticks to that original pretty I mean, it really just stays on track with that original film, and they didn't really do too much to really separate itself from that original source material. I mean, even calling it Cape Fear again, because the book was called The Exterminators. What was it? Oh, The Executioners. Oh yeah, sorry. The original book was called The Executioners. So they're really just borrowing a lot from that original film. Like we discussed the score just now. But they did do some new things with the Bowden family. Obviously, the family dynamic isn't the perfect family from the original film. And then, you know, you let De Niro just let him go as Max Cady. It's definitely a departure in that aspect, just what they did with the characters. And I think there's definitely some memorable things, especially about De Niro's Max Cady. I mean, like I said, I just watched that all the time as a kid. And they cleaned up some things, definitely, at the ending. I think it just moves a little bit better. Even though it's weird that let's leave the house, even though these two people got murdered, I do think the ending works better. You know, giving the women in the family a little more agency, fighting against Max and not just leaving it to the men this time, was appreciated. So, you know, it didn't blow me away, what Scorsese did, but I think the portrayals are just so interesting and so fun. Fun is a loose term because it's pretty violent material, but you know, just seeing De Niro go crazy Southern like that. And yeah, I think this remake should exist. Like I said, it's just been parodied so many times in TV and movies, and I know it's stuck in my mind, especially that ending. The way De Niro is just looking at you while he's drowning is just like, that's an image that's burned into my brain forever. So I absolutely think this remake should exist.
Yeah. And for me, this is my first time obviously watching both films. I started with the original and was actually pretty impressed with the pacing and the subject matter. I think that, like, I was surprised that they handled such kind of like tough themes with someone like a Gregory Peck, you know, like that.
Yeah.
You know, it appeared to me to have been a pretty bold undertaking of a film, and I think they handled it really well. And I was not at all kind of like underwhelmed or bored while watching the movie. I thought it was a really competent film. The remake, to me, like you said, they didn't really change much in terms of like the general bones of the film. But what I think that what makes this remake stronger, or sort of these character studies, Nick Nolte's take on Sam, it was okay. I thought he was honestly one of the weaker links in the film in terms of his portrayal. I think I'm just used to Nick Nolte in different stuff, and I didn't buy him as a Gregory Peck type character. And by having him be a little more like rough around the edges, I think that did help smooth it out. But like, Rob De Niro is absolutely phenomenal as this villain. Like I mentioned, it gets a little close to like a Jason Voorhees type thing by the end. It's like, all right, why isn't this guy dead yet? Sort of deal. But it, you know, stayed enough grounded in reality that I thought it worked well. He got totally shredded for this role. He was very scary, and like you said, that the idea of like staring somebody down while you're drowning is terrifying. I thought it was really well done. But the mother and the daughter, I mean, standouts in the films.
Right.
So Jessica Lange and Juliette Lewis, just, I mean, they were very strong in this movie, specifically Juliette Lewis. And let's not forget Joe Don Baker's private investigator. Like, just having De Niro's strong character and those other three being such strong characters, it made it well worth watching the film. I think that the remake totally should exist. Like you mentioned, it wasn't like a home run hit for Scorsese. I've definitely seen better stuff from him. But the actors, he got a lot out of those actors, and I thought that was impressive. There's a little bit of shakiness in the ending and how it's set up, but it works well enough. So I thought it was a good movie, and I'm glad we watched it. It should totally exist.
Yeah. For me, there's just so many moments in that remake that are just like, I just feel like they are iconic. Like De Niro smoking that cigar, obnoxiously watching Problem Child in the theater. Fucking, I love that bear and that fucking fishing line. That's such a good moment for me. You know, again, and the eyes just staring at you as you drown. So there's just so many moments in that movie that just like feel like they're so good and it's done so well.
They really are. I mean, there were moments where it kind of it was kind of giving me like Natural Born Killer vibes. It was like, all right, are we stylizing a little too much of this? But it was grounded enough. And I think like the film shined particularly strong in its early parts of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like I think the original was a slow starter that like got interesting towards the middle. This film was like just out the gate, ready to go. Got a little muddy towards the end, but like stuck the landing, I think. And I thought the remake was pretty good.
Yeah, the way Scorsese shot it, he was very influenced by Hitchcock. There's a lot of quick pans of the camera, a lot of fast zooms in on and like random situations, not necessarily intense situations, but it definitely gives like a frantic feel in the remake.
Like
that
even that
happens a lot.
squash game is like shot like frantically. I thought that was interesting, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a good movie. The special effects, there's a lot of green screen. You can really notice it. Like it's the clouds. He wants this dark, ominous feeling following Max Cady sometimes, and it's just you could see the green screen. That didn't age well, but you know, there's still some good shots that Scorsese's got here.
I don't think he necessarily needed like that to make this Max Cady ominous. Like
I don't think he needed it either. Yeah.
I think the original shows you that you don't have to be like obviously scary to be scary. Like that guy just like wearing like a what is it, like a Cuban shirt and a Panama hat. Like it's like what the guy looks like he's going on vacation. And yet here he is drinking a beer, looking at your teenage daughter. It's like, hey man, that's creepy. Cut that shit out.
That's what we thought. What's our next episode, Reggie?
Well, I've been thinking about this a bit, you know, and we're actually in this mode where like people aren't able to go to theaters and stuff like that. So like a lot of movies are coming out like streaming services. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that because Godzilla versus King Kong is coming out, so that it might be a good idea to explore our friend, the lovable King Kong. Let's find out his origins, his backstories, the originals, the remakes. Let's do it.
Okay, so which King Kong? Because there's quite a few, and I believe Jessica Lange is even in one of them. I think there are 4 different King Kongs. There's the original one, there's the one with Jessica Lange, there's the Peter Jackson one, and then there's the one that came out a few years ago. That's the current run of King Kong.
You know what, Dan? Since there are so many versions of this, we got to hone in. I think we got to go with the original 33. I mean, the original is the original.
Of course.
And although there is a more modern remake, perhaps we'll explore at some other point. Let's watch the 76 version with the same damn actress.
Jessica Lange run. All right, I like it. Yeah. No, it's good. This could be a good opportunity to like do multiple episodes like on kind of the same movie because there are so many King Kong remakes, so it could be interesting to revisit King Kong in another capacity. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, with the pace Hollywood's going, we're gonna be able to do a lot of remakes and remakes.
yes, it's pretty nuts.
I mean, clearly they're not done with King Kong because, like I said, HBO Max is doing Godzilla versus King Kong. It comes out this month.
And I'm gonna watch it. Yeah.
So am I. And I'm gonna watch the new Mortal Kombat. Wait a minute.
Oh hell yeah! Oh yeah, dude! I can't wait for the Snyder cut coming out this soon.
Snyder cut. Dude, you know what's crazy? We're gonna be able to do Mortal Kombat.
And I don't know if it might be like a retro versus like a reboot episode.
Yeah, it's more
of a reboot, right. But we could still do it because we did Tomb Raider. I don't see why we wouldn't be able to do Mortal Kombat as well.
I was just thinking about it though. Like,
yeah, that's cool.
We're gonna get all vaccinated and shit. That's weird costumes for that one. All right, so King Kong. King Kong kind of 2, but not 3 or 4. There's so many versions. So for the audience, check the notes and make sure you're watching the right one.
Awesome. All right, so next episode is going to be King Kong. Well, that was our episode on Cape Fear. Definitely let us know what you guys thought. Did you agree with us? Did you disagree with us? Did we miss anything? Definitely let us know in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube and aren't subscribed, please subscribe to us. Help the channel grow. If you're listening on iTunes, if you can give us a 5-star review, that would also greatly help us grow.
I mean, guys, as always, thanks for listening. You can check us out. We're on iTunes. We're on Spotify. If you're watching this, you're watching it on YouTube. On social media, it's at Retro vs. Remake on, I believe, Instagram and Twitter. So, yeah, check us out. As always, thanks for listening, guys. I'm Reggie Parker.
And I'm Dan Bulick. This has been another episode of Retro vs. Remake.